You went back to a house you thought you had left behind, not in waking life, in your sleep, and the house was not a stranger's house. It was the house of your lineage, the home of a grandparent, an ancestor, a family member from a generation before yours, a structure whose rooms you may have physically visited only a handful of times, or perhaps never at all, and yet in the dream you moved through it with the particular familiarity of someone who has always belonged there. The walls knew you. The rooms had a weight to them that ordinary dream rooms do not carry, and when you woke up, something specific followed you back into the morning that was different from the residue of ordinary dreams. It was not simply an emotional impression. It was a question with roots, a question that reached back through generations, rather than simply through your own personal history, and you have not known quite what to do with it. Because the house in your dream was not empty. It was full of furniture you recognized, of light that fell at specific angles, of a silence that somehow communicated more than words. And the fullness of it in the dream has made the waking silence around it feel significant rather than random. Today, I want to give that significance a name. Because what God is doing when He takes you back to the house of your ancestors during a season of waiting is not a psychological exercise in nostalgia. It is a prophetic excavation, and the architecture of that ancestral house, the specific rooms you visited, the specific areas that drew your attention, the specific quality of presence or absence you encountered in its corridors, is a communication about your present that is encoded in the language of your past. I want to call what is happening with the full authority it deserves. This is the ancestral house season. It is the period when God reaches back through the architecture of your family's history to retrieve what belongs to your future. When He uses the structural memory of your lineage as the language through which He speaks about what He is reclaiming, restoring, and repositioning in the covenant chapter that is approaching. The house in your dream is not a memorial. It is a blueprint, and God is not taking you back there to mourn. He is taking you back there to build from. Ruth, chapter 4, verse 14 up to 15, contains a declaration that speaks directly into the ancestral house season with a precision that most people miss because they read it as a narrative conclusion rather than a prophetic template. After the covenant between Ruth and Boaz was sealed, after the legal redemption that restored what had been lost, the women of the community said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May He become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age." Renew your life, not begin a new life. Not replace what was lost with something unrelated. Renew, which carries the specific meaning of restoring to its original vitality, bringing back to full function what had deteriorated or been diminished. The covenant God was building through Ruth was not starting from nothing. It was reaching back into the house of Naomi's lineage, into the family structure that grief had emptied, and restoring what the empty rooms had lost. And the ancestral house dream is God doing the same thing in you. He is not taking you back to the house of your ancestors because He wants you to live in the past. He is taking you back because there is something in the structure of that house, some inheritance, some character trait, some quality of faith, or covenant or purpose that belonged to your lineage and was not fully passed forward, and God is going back to retrieve it before your next chapter begins. Here is the first thing the ancestral house dream is almost certainly communicating, and it is the one that will reframe everything you have assumed about why your season of waiting has felt the way it has. The waiting is not only about your individual preparation. It is about the preparation of something that spans generations. Most people in a season of waiting are focused, understandably and reasonably, on their own readiness, their own character, their own interior work. But the ancestral house dream is revealing that God's preparation for your appointed chapter is operating on a timeline that precedes your birth. He is not simply preparing you, he is preparing the continuation of something that began in a generation before you, something that was interrupted, delayed, or imperfectly transmitted in the house of your ancestors. And the covenant he is bringing you toward is partly the vessel through which what was incomplete in your lineage finally reaches its fullness. Exodus chapter 20 verse 6 establishes the generational dimension of God's covenant faithfulness. But showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. 1,000 generations. The love of God and the blessing of covenant does not operate on individual timelines only. It moves through family lines, through ancestral houses, through the specific structures of generational connection, accumulating, building, and in some cases being retrieved from the place where it was temporarily interrupted. The house in your dream is where the interruption happened. And the season of waiting you are in is the season in which God is addressing the interruption before he sends what belongs to your generation forward. There is a second dimension to the ancestral house dream that requires the most careful attention, because it is the one most likely to produce confusion if it is not understood correctly. The specific rooms in the dream matter, not as symbols to be decoded with a dictionary, but as indicators of the specific area of generational inheritance that God is addressing in your season. If the dream took you to the kitchen, the place of daily nourishment, of provision, of the ordinary sustaining of life, God may be addressing the generational patterns around provision, around what your lineage believed about abundance and scarcity, around whether love was expressed through giving or withholding. If the dream took you to a bedroom, the place of rest, of intimacy, of the most private dimensions of life, God may be addressing the generational patterns around trust, around vulnerability, around what your family's history taught you to expect from closeness. If the dream took you to a door that was locked, or a room you could not enter, or a staircase that did not lead where you expected, God may be communicating that there is a specific area of generational inheritance that has been sealed off, and that he is now in the process of opening for the first time in your line. Psalm chapter 24 verse 7 carries this unlocking language with prophetic resonance. Lift up your heads, you gates. Be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Ancient doors. The gates and doors of an ancestral house that have been closed for generations. Closed by grief, by patterns of fear, by the accumulated weight of what previous generations did not know how to do differently. And the King of glory does not wait patiently outside those ancient doors. He calls them to be lifted. He commands them to open, and he sends you back to the house in your dreams because the opening is happening in your generation. And he needs you to know which door is being addressed so that you can cooperate with the unlocking rather than inadvertently reinforcing the closure. Here is the third dimension, and this is the one that speaks most directly to the covenant relationship that your season of waiting is preparing you for. The ancestral house in your dream may be revealing the specific relational patterns that your family line established, the blueprints, conscious and unconscious, that governed how love was expressed, how conflict was handled, how intimacy was either offered or withheld across generations. And these patterns, inherited not through deliberate choice, but through the osmosis of proximity and example, are the interior architecture that every relationship you have entered has been built upon. The question that the ancestral house dream is asking is not simply, what happened in that house? It is, what did that house teach you to expect from love? And is that expectation aligned with what God has actually designed for you? Because the covenant relationship that is approaching, your season is not going to look like what that house taught you to expect. It is going to look like what God designed, which may be significantly more peaceful, more stable, more spacious, more consistently present than anything the ancestral house modeled. And God is taking you back to the house in the dream, so that you can see the blueprint clearly, not to condemn it, not to condemn the people who built it, but to consciously choose what to carry forward from it and what to leave in the rooms where it was formed. Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 20, speaks of the generational boundary that God establishes for this very purpose. The one who sins will die. The child will not share the guilt of the parent, nor will the parent share the guilt of the child. The pattern does not have to continue. The blueprint of the ancestral house does not have to become the blueprint of your covenant. And the ancestral house dream is God's way of showing you the specific rooms where the old blueprint was formed so that you can make the conscious, informed, spiritually supported decision to build differently. Now, I want to address something about the emotional quality of the ancestral house dream that most people carry but rarely name. The dream was likely not emotionally simple. It probably contained a mixture that is difficult to hold in a single feeling. Something like grief and belonging simultaneously. Something like the ache of absence and the warmth of recognition at the same time. Because ancestral houses are rarely straightforwardly joyful or straightforwardly painful. They are complex. They hold the legacy of love that was genuine even when it was imperfectly expressed. They hold the memory of people who were doing the best they could with what they had, even when what they had was not enough. They hold the sense of roots, of being connected to something larger than your individual story, alongside the sense of wounds that those same roots produced. And the dream returned you to that complexity not to destabilize you, but to stabilize you. Because a person who has consciously visited the ancestral house, who has walked its rooms with honest eyes, who has named what was good and what was broken, who has received the inheritance worth carrying and released the inheritance worth leaving, that person carries a quality of rootedness into their covenant relationship that cannot be manufactured by someone who has never done the ancestral work. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 7 up to 8 describes the person who is rooted in this way. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. Roots by the stream. The person who has gone back to the ancestral house, not to live there but to complete. The unfinished work that the house contains comes out with roots that go deeper than their own individual experience. They come out with the kind of stability that is generationally sourced, and that stability is precisely what the covenant relationship God is preparing for your season will require, not the fragile stability of someone who has avoided the ancestral work, but the rooted stability of someone who has done it. There is one more dimension of the ancestral house dream that I want to name before we bring everything together, because this dimension is the most hope-filled and the most misunderstood. Some of what you saw in the ancestral house dream was not only about what to release, some of it was about what to receive, because ancestral houses do not only carry wounds, they carry gifts, they carry dormant capacities, strengths that were present in your lineage but never fully activated, faith that was planted but never fully harvested, a quality of covenant-keeping or creative expression or spiritual sensitivity that belonged to your family line and was never given the conditions it needed to fully flourish. And the God who declares in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 5, "The Lord your God will bring you to the land that belonged to your ancestors, and you will take possession of it. He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors." That God is not only the God of ancestral houses. He is the God who restores the inheritance of ancestral houses to the generation that has been prepared to steward it. He makes you more prosperous than your ancestors, not in spite of the ancestral house, because of what the ancestral house contained, that no previous generation was positioned to fully inherit. And in your season of waiting, in the specific season in which this dream has arrived, God is preparing you to be the generation that finally brings to fullness what was planted in your lineage before you could receive it. The house was not a dead end. It was a seed ground, And what is about to spring from it, through your covenant, through your character, through the specific chapter that is approaching, is the fullness of an inheritance that your ancestors prayed toward without being able to personally receive. Let everything that has been said land now with the full weight it carries. You were taken back to the ancestral house because you are not a person who simply begins. You are a person who completes. You are the generation that God positioned at, the intersection of what your lineage planted and what your future will harvest. And the waiting season you have been living in is the specific period in which He is ensuring that you arrive at that intersection with the roots, the discernment, the released patterns, and the received inheritance that the harvest will require. Lamentations chapter 5 verse 21 is the prayer that the ancestral house season calls for. Restore us to yourself, Lord, that we may return, renew our days as of old. Restore, return, renew, not a return to live in the past, a return to retrieve what the past contains that belongs in the future. And the God who answers that prayer is the same God who took you back to the ancestral house in your dream, not to leave you there, but to ensure that you came away from it carrying what it always held for you. Consider these moments of reflection as indicators that your heart is actively sorting through its foundations. This deep interior work is a vital step toward emotional health. Cultivating this kind of generational wisdom equips you to build future relationships on a foundation of genuine stability, peace, and spiritual maturity when the time is right. If this reflection brings a sense of clarity to your path, I invite you to share your perspective in the comments below. How do you practice the discipline of honoring what was good in your family history while consciously stepping away from old patterns that no longer serve your growth? Let's use the comments below as a supportive, healthy space to encourage one another with real wisdom and honest dialogue about our journeys. Subscribe to this channel, because your spirit deserves a consistent place where the deepest and most complex questions of your waiting season are given the theological depth, generational context, and prophetic clarity that surface-level encouragement simply cannot reach. New messages are released regularly. Every one of them is planted for the person in the ancestral season. The one whose waiting is operating on a timeline longer than their own life. The one who is learning that what God is preparing is not just for them, but through them. The one who is becoming the generation that finally brings the inheritance home. The house was not a dead end. It is the ground from which your personal growth and maturity are actively flourishing.